Welcome to Luso History. In this video, I will talk to you about Oro Novo. I hope you like it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. The Dictatorship was an authoritarian regime that dominated Portugal from 1933 to 1000. 974, commanded by Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, born amid the crisis of the First Republic. The regime brought political stability, but at the expense of freedom and civil rights. To understand the impact of this regime in Portugal, we need to go back to the beginning of the 20th century, when the country was in a deep political and social crisis. The First Republic, proclaimed in 1910, was marked by unstable governments, coup d'état strikes, and a weakened economy, which culminated in the military dictatorship of 1926. In this context, Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, a conservative economist and fervent Catholic, entered on the political scene, first as Minister of Finance, and quickly stood out as the solution to the country's financial problems. In 1932, Salazar was appointed Prime Minister, and the following year he established the 933 Constitution, officially marking the beginning of the Oro Novo. Salazar had a very clear vision of how Portugal should be governed: centralized, conservative, religious and corporatist, inspired by fascist regimes in Europe, such as Mussolini. The Dictatorship Novo adopted an ideology that mixed corporatism, social order and national unity, and would prosper under strong leadership, without the party divisions or strikes that had marked the First Republic. The new constitution eliminated political plurality and limited civil liberties. The regime was based on the idea that the state should be the main guide of economic and social life, organizing society into corporations that represented different professional sectors, such as workers and entrepreneurs. This corporate structure was seen as an alternative to the class conflicts promoted by unions and political parties. However, in practice, this organization favored the economic elites and kept the majority of the Portuguese population in conditions of poverty. The regime promoted a nationalist policy, exalting values, such as patriotism, respect for authority, and the Catholic religion. The Catholic Church, a longtime ally of the Dictatorship Novo, played a fundamental role in legitimizing the government, controlling much of education, and reinforcing conservative values. Create society. Quickly established itself as one of the most repressive regimes in Western Europe. To guarantee control over the population and eliminate any opposition, Salazar created a powerful machine of political repression, the PVDE, State Surveillance and Defense Police, founded in 1933 and later replaced by the PIDE, State Defense and International Police, became the armed wing of the regime. The PDE was responsible for the surveillance, censorship, and detention of anyone suspected of subversive activities such as communists, socialists, or defenders of democracy. Censorship was one of the main instruments of control. All newspapers, magazines, books, and even plays were subject to prior approval by the regime. Nothing could be published or circulated without censorship endorsement, which meant that criticism of the government, any aspect of society, or the church was silenced. Furthermore, propaganda was intensely used to promote the image of Salazar as the savior of the fatherland, an austere and incorruptible leader, always concerned with the well-being of the nation. Education was also a tool of the regime. The government controlled the school curriculum, promoting an extremely conservative and nationalist view of history and culture. Students were indoctrinated from an early age to respect authority, value Catholicism, and obey the rules established by the regime. The economic policy of the Itio Novo was based on principles of self-sufficiency and fiscal conservatism. Salazar believed that the economy should be controlled by the state. With few external interventions, the country should live within its means, avoiding large debts or dependence on foreign investment. This policy brought some stability at the beginning, with a significant reduction in the deficit and public debt. However, this restrictive approach limited the country's long-term economic development, while other European nations, especially in the post-war period, experienced rapid economic growth and the modernization of their infrastructure. Portugal was stuck in relative backwardness, industrialization was slow, and the standard of living of most Portuguese remained low agriculture, which was the basis of the economy, for a large part of the population remained rudimentary and inefficient. Many Portuguese, with no prospects for improving their lives, were forced to immigrate. One of the central aspects of the Itio Novo was its colonial policy. For Salazar, the colonies were a fundamental part of Portugal's identity and greatness. During its government, Portugal controlled vast territories in Africa, such as Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, as well as colonies in Asia, such as Timor-Leste and Goa, the latter lost in 1000 Firas. 961. After the invasion of India, the regime refused to accept the decolonization trends that were spreading around the world in the post-war period. Salazar believed that the overseas territories were an extension of Portugal and should be preserved at all costs. In 1961, the colonial war broke out, starting in Angola and quickly spreading to Mozambique and Guinea. This war, which would last until the end of the regime, was a long and devastating conflict which drained Portugal's financial and human resources. Salazar was determined to maintain the colonies, even while other European countries had already granted their independence. The war caused great discontent among the population, especially in the families of young soldiers sent to fight in Africa. In the 60s and 70s, the regime began to weaken. The weight of the colonial warfare, Portugal's diplomatic isolation, and economic stagnation became unsustainable after the fall of Salazar, who suffered a stroke in 1000. 968, his successor, Marcelo Caetano, tried to carry out small reforms, however. These reforms were insufficient to resolve the regime's structural problems, or to satisfy growing demands for freedom and change. Discontent within the armed forces increased, especially among lower-ranking officers, who were increasingly critical of the war in Africa. This discontent culminated in the Carnation Revolution on April 25, 1974. When a group of soldiers, the Armed Forces Movement, took to the streets of Lisbon and peacefully overthrew the regime, the Portuguese population joined the military. In a movement that was marked by the absence of violence, which allowed a smooth transition to democracy. Itio Novo profoundly marked the history of Portugal for almost half a century. The Salazar and Caetano regime controlled the country with an iron fist, limiting civil liberties, repressing dissent, and keeping Portugal isolated from the rest of Europe. The end of the Itio Novo brought freedom, but also challenges. However, the Carnation Revolution represented a new beginning for Portugal, which has since followed the path of democracy and European integration. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video.